In this problem, we want to solve the equation by completing the square. So I'm going to start off with our equation, x squared minus 8x minus 7 equals 0. And I want to keep the two terms with the x variable on the left-hand side. I'm going to add 7 to both sides so that I have my constant on the right-hand side. So then I have x squared minus 8x, and I'm leaving a space here, and on the other side I have 7. Okay, so now I have to figure out what should be added to both sides. I have 8 as my coefficient of the middle term, and I don't need to care about whether it's a positive or a negative 8. So I'm going to take the 8, divide by 2, and square. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I need to add 16 to the left-hand side to complete the square. And I have to add 16 to the right-hand side because I need to keep the equation in balance. So now I can factor x squared minus 8x plus 16, and that factors into x minus 4 quantity squared. We made it a perfect square trinomial, so it's going to be a binomial squared. That's what it means to be a perfect square trinomial. And on the right-hand side, 16 and 7 make 23. So now I want to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of the right-hand side, because that's a constant, I'm going to put a plus minus in front of that radical. So now I have x minus 4, because the square and the radical cancel out, equals plus or minus square root of 23. And now I add 4 to both sides, and I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 23. And those are my two solutions to this equation. So that was question 14 on the final exam review. Let's take a look at question 19. Here we want to solve this equation by factoring, and then we'll use the zero product principle. So we have 3x minus 5 equals 48 x cubed minus 80 x squared. First thing I want to do, if I'm going to do this by factoring, get all my terms on one side together. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides, and that cancels. And I can add 5 to both sides, and that cancels. So on the left, I'm left with 0 equals 48 x cubed minus 80 x squared minus 3x plus 5. I've got 4 terms. There's nothing that I can combine. So I'm going to factor this by grouping. So I group together my first 2 terms and then my second 2 terms. So 0 is going to equal, and let's see, what do we have in common for 48 and 80? There's a 16 in common, and x cubed and x squared, there's an x squared in common. And so that leaves me with 3x minus 5. Okay. And now I look at the second group. There's a negative here. Whenever there's a negative in front of the third term, then I'm going to factor out a negative. And I can just say that that's a -1. And then I have positive 3x minus 5 because both of those signs changed. So now I have a common binomial. These two match. If they don't match, go back and check because likely you made a mistake. They generally do work out. All right, so I'm going to factor that common binomial, 3x minus 5. And what that leaves me with is 16x squared minus 1. The second factor, 16x squared minus 1, can factor into two binomials. So 3x minus 5. 16 breaks up into 4x and 4x. So 16x squared breaks up into 4x and 4x. And the 1 breaks up into 1 and 1. And I have a plus and a minus because that was the difference of two squares. So since this set of factors multiply to make 0, that means that one of them must be equal to 0, one of the factors. So we take each factor and we solve for x. So here I can add 5 to both sides and divide by 3, and I get x equals 5 over 3. I take 4x plus 1, set that equal to 0, and this is going to give me a solution of x equals -1/4. And finally, if I set 4x minus 1 equal to 0, and I solve for x is going to equal 1 over 4. So my solution set is 5 over 3, -1/4, and +1/4. And that's my solution to that problem. Let's take a look at one more. In question 64, we want to complete the square and write the equation in standard form. So I start off with what I was given, x squared plus y squared plus 12x minus 2y equals -28. And now I'm going to rewrite this so that I have my x terms grouped together. So that gives me x squared and a plus 12x. And I'm going to write those in blue to kind of show that they're grouped together. And then I'm going to leave a space. And I'm going to say, then I have plus y squared and a minus 2y. Those are in red so that those are grouped together. And then again, I leave a space. And I say, well, that's equal to -28. So now I'm ready to complete the square. So I have to take the coefficient of the x term, which is 12, and divide it by 2, and then square that result. So 12 divided by 2 is 6, squared gives me 36. So here I'm going to add 36 to the left side in this group. So then I should add 36 to the right side to keep the equation in balance. Now I'll do the same thing with y. So we have 2 as the coefficient of y. It's actually -2. But again, we don't really have to worry about the sign because we're going to square this number. So whether it's positive or negative, in the end, is going to be positive. So 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. Square 1, and you still have 1. So I have a plus 1 on the left and a plus 1 on the right. Okay. So now we're ready to factor the x terms, or the blue terms that we have there. And this is going to factor into x plus 6 quantity squared. So because this is a plus, that's why this has to be a plus. And then we just take the square root of x squared and the square root of 36, and that's how we get our first and last terms. I do the same thing with y. So I have y squared, that's going to become y. I have a plus 1, that becomes 1. And because this is a minus 2y, it's going to be y minus 1. And then we square. And on the right-hand side, when I take negative 28 plus 36 plus 1, I get 9. I don't know why my cat just yelled, but unrelated to math. Okay, so now we want to know, so we've got the equation of the circle. So that's my equation in standard form. And I want the center of the circle, which is going to be a point. So I look at the expression x plus 6. If I set that equal to 0, I would get x equals negative 6. So that's the x-coordinate of the center. And then I do the same thing with y minus 1. Set that equal to 0, and y equals 1. That's the y-coordinate. So you can either think of it as solving those little equations, or you can just know that if you're in standard form, that means, we want to say that we're in the form x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared. So h is always going to be opposite in sign to what we have here. And then the same thing for k. That's going to be opposite in sign. So we've got our center. And then the radius is the square root of 9, and that is 3. And that's how you do those problems.